Welcome to the Plant Centered and Thriving podcast. I'm your host, Ashley Kitchens. Welcome to the show, Plant Centered listener. My name is Ashley and I am your host today. Imagine being what you think is a healthy and fit person. You've pursued health, nutrition, fitness for years, and then all of a sudden you're in the doctor's office being diagnosed with gray zone lymphoma. This is exactly what happened to our guest today about a year ago now. And this is the story of George, who grew up in the New York area before moving to Durham to go to Duke. He falls in love with North Carolina. He never leaves. He and his wife raise 4 children, and they now have 9 grandchildren. George has a financial planning practice here in Durham with his partner, Joe. And in addition to all that, he's pursued, like I said, health and fitness for years. So it came as quite the shock when he was diagnosed with lymphoma. Along with traditional medical protocol of chemotherapy, George ends up pursuing a strict plan of action, including diet and exercise to eliminate the cancer and mitigate the effects of the chemotherapy. This story, y'all, is incredible. And this is George's unique perspective that he shares with you. And I cannot wait for you to hear it as well. Please join me in welcoming to the show, George. I kind of want to start at the beginning with your story, George, and kind of take us back to how everything started.
Sure. So I guess it started in early 2022 when I got COVID, and I thought that I eventually developed long COVID. So for starting in the spring of 22 all the way through the fall, I had this lingering, annoying cough. And it wasn't until in the fall, the late fall of 22, that I noticed a hard lump in my neck.
Oh.
And I pointed it out to my doctor, and he got very alarmed with the exam. It was obviously a swollen lymph node, and we immediately did some bloods, and I had elevated inflammation markers, and so he suggested biopsies. And that was a long, rocky road, to be honest, because the needle biopsy didn't show anything. So then we did a more invasive surgical biopsy. It wasn't conclusive. We had to do a third biopsy at Duke, and it wasn't entirely conclusive either. I engaged an oncologist who was kind of out of the system, I wanted a third party reference. And she said, listen, I think this is so unusual. We need to take your biopsy and send it to the National Institute of Health, where Dr. Jeffries, who is a well-known pathologist, can take a look at it. And she did, and she came back and said, you have lymphoma, but it's not Hodgkin's and it's not non-Hodgkin's. It's this rare version called gray zone. So I had gray zone lymphoma, and I interviewed the lymphoma specialist at Duke. Frankly, did not really like her bedside manner. I talked a lot about diet, and she didn't really want to hear about it. She just said, if you pursue diet to treat this, you'll be dead in a year. Okay? You'll be dead in a year. And she was just so very matter of fact and frank, and just didn't believe it. It was obvious. I just said, okay, well, I need to look at someone else. And so I went to UNC, found another oncologist who, although she didn't seem very well versed in diet as a treatment or a kind of a strong supplement to traditional medicine, she was certainly more open to it and not so antagonistic. So that's where I ended up going for the traditional approach to treating cancer. You're not going to be surprised. It's chemo and maybe radiation and whatever else. So I should take one step back and say that between all these biopsies and consultations and all that stuff, I went to a website called Chris Beat Cancer. A friend had recommended this. This is a man named Chris Wark. And Chris, at 26, got colon cancer and pursued a holistic approach to treating cancer. So it's food, it's meditation, it's exercise, it's community, all the things that we know from a holistic point of view are great medicine. It's really about food as medicine, primarily. And so I dove in with both feet to understand his protocol and follow his steps. He has about a dozen videos where he goes into great depth about all of those ways of addressing cancer, all kinds of cancer.
Is this, when you saw your first oncologist, was this kind of the approach that you had in mind? Had you already been introduced to it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And she just kind of treated it like, well, that's all well and good, but you really need to do this with strong chemotherapy.
Yeah.
That was her approach. And I said, well, isn't chemotherapy toxic? Well, yeah. And isn't it carcinogenic? The actual therapy? Well, yeah, it might be, but you're going to die without it, so you need it. It's very effective. And it is hard to argue that for lymphoma, anyhow, the data is out there. They've tested this clinically. It's got something like a 75% or better chance of curing lymphoma. So it's hard to argue that you shouldn't do that. And when I had the conversation with my wife and kids, my adult kids, they were all like, "No, you got to do that, Dad.
Yeah.
The diet just scares us too much. You can't just do that."
Sure. Yes. Yeah. And it sounds like you ended up going down the path of both eventually.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's right. I actually had a chance to pursue the diet protocol for about 2 months before I launched into the chemo. Some of that had to do with insurance coverage, and I changed insurance, and so we needed a little bit of time. But in that time, the tumor in my neck went down substantially. I felt great energy. I started to feel better. By the way, I should say I did have this, what they call mediastinal B cell lymphoma. So it wasn't just in my neck. It was also, there was a large mass behind my sternum, and it really could have been life-threatening if we'd let it, continue on, for sure.
Yeah. Well, and how are you feeling too, kind of getting these biopsies done and it keeps coming back inconclusive, and then, it's being shipped off to this other doctor? I mean, how are you kind of feeling that time? That's a lot of waiting time trying to figure out what is going on with you and your health.
It is. And that was probably the toughest time through the whole journey, was just kind of figuring out what on earth is this really, and how do we treat it, and what's the prognosis, all that. Yeah, you're right.
So a couple months before you even started chemo, you started this approach that Chris highly recommends, that he used himself. And it sounds like your tumor already started shrinking a little bit.
It did. It was very clear. Of course, the doctor said, "Oh no, you're just losing weight, and you're leaving more room for the tumor to feel better. It doesn't feel so tight in your neck." They don't want to believe that you can address it this way.
Yeah. Which I'll say, George, it's so frustrating to hear that, because there's so much evidence that shows how impactful diet can be on a variety of different health conditions.
That's right.
And
That's right.
just
doctors aren't trained this way. They get their training largely from the pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah.
Big Pharm, pays for the studies, pays for their information that they are trained on, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's why doctors have two major tools on their tool belt, right? It's surgery, it's cutting, or it's medication. It's not diet, sleep, and exercise and meditation. They're not going to tell you that. They're not going to prescribe that.
Right, which
Right.
is what you were practicing the 2 months, right, leading up to your
That's right.
chemo. I am curious, and it's unfortunate that people like Chris kind of get pushed aside, and it's like, "Oh, that person's, quote, crazy, or they're kind of
Right.
a whack or something."
Right.
Um, but I know we kind of talked offline that Chris has a ton of testimonials of people who have followed his program. And of course, it's very important, if you're listening to this, to kind of do your own research and do what's best for you. Because by no means is this medical advice. We're just kind of sharing
That's
our
right.
own stories of what
That's right.
our opinions are here. But could you kind of explain what you were doing those 2 months leading up to getting your chemo?
Absolutely, absolutely. Up to and throughout the chemo, I should say. This
Yeah.
was a good at least 6 to 8 months of this protocol, and it's really pretty simple. You eat two enormous, he calls them cancer-beating salads a day, and you can augment that later with things like oatmeal, and I'll get into that, and juicing. So it's basically 40 to 60 ounces of root juices every day. And then I also would have a green lemonade, which is basically an organic lemon and four green apples, and or at least that ratio in the juicer. So you're drinking that every day. A smoothie every day, which is basically organic cherries and strawberries, a banana, and an organic lemon. I would add to that cranberry, freeze-dried cranberry powder, and amla. And amla is actually known as a gooseberry. It's widely used in India and in Ayurvedic medicine, where they use that powder because it's the one fruit on earth that has the most antioxidants on the planet. So, but it's very bitter, so it's best to used in things like smoothies. So I was doing that every day, and certainly just all the raw vegetables in smoothies for 90 days. And then after that, I started to introduce some cooked vegetables as well. So the salads would have broccoli sprouts, leafy greens, carrots, tomatoes, anything that I wanted on the salad really was fine. Sauerkraut, because you want fermented things in your diet every day to try to replace the gut system that you're destroying with chemo.
So I know that you mentioned, George, eating a lot of salads, you're pressing a lot of fruits and vegetables and making juices and smoothies. And you also mentioned cooked vegetables as well. Kind of how did that play a role into your diet?
Yes, so I was really all raw for the first 90 days, but that does get old, and after a while you do want to have cooked foods. So I would pretty consistently roast cauliflower, roast broccoli, asparagus. I actually went to acupuncturist every week, and she was terrific helping me kind of support my liver and detox. But she also said, eat asparagus every day if you can. In Eastern medicine, that's considered a superfood. So I roasted a lot of asparagus. I ate that. My wife is from Portugal, and so she would routinely make me these vegan soups, which is basically zucchini, some potato, garlic, onion, leeks, spinach, all those kinds of things. So I would routinely have these vegan soups. So I did kind of go to some cooked foods, later on.
So
Yeah,
a lot of plants, it sounds like.
a lot of plants, right?
Yeah.
And by the way, you don't eat any animal products.
Wow.
And he goes into great depth explaining the carcinogenic effects of animal products
Mm.
and all the things that are in them. I mean, even if you're eating organic animal products, there's all kinds of reasons not to be.
Yeah.
Um, that was a little bit easier for me because in the fall of 2021, I was bit by a tick and got alpha gal.
That's right.
Are you familiar? Do you know other people with alpha gal?
Yeah, yeah, I do. I've met several. Yes.
Yeah. So it's for folks listening who aren't in the Southeast United States, this is becoming a real issue for us in the South. if you get bit by the Lone Star tick, you have this autoimmune reaction to mammal. So I actually went to the ER after eating a steak. I broke out in hives, terrible hives, and they were worried I was going to have an anaphylactic reaction. I didn't because they, gave me steroids and all that. So it's been a couple of years now that I was off of all mammal anyhow.
Yes. Wait, so what was the timeline? Did you get bit by the tick first? Remind me.
That's right.
Because and then
Fall of 2021, got COVID in spring of 2022, discovered the lymphoma, by February of 2023.
wow. Oh my
Yeah,
goodness,
yeah,
George.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
It sounds like too, following this program, it was
Mm,
probably, I'm assuming, a little bit different than maybe the lifestyle that you were following previously with your diet, at least.
that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. I had been exercising for years, and I didn't let that drop. So 5 days a week, I was doing some kind of high intensity exercise throughout the cancer treatment. So I was boxing twice a week and lifting weights with a personal trainer the other 3 days.
And this was
Yeah,
during your chemotherapy.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I actually feel like the reason I felt good enough to do that was because I was overdosing on nutrients.
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
feeding my body all the things it needed, and that kept my energy level.
Yeah.
I occasionally needed to stop in the afternoon and take a nap, but that's about it.
Yep. Yeah. Yep. Wow. I
Right?
like that term too, overdosing on nutrients. I think that's
Yeah,
fantastic.
yeah, yeah. That's kind of Chris's mantra.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah,
hmm
that's wonderful.
The other thing I wanted to mention was that I worked out 5 days a week, but that's not for everybody. And some people just get hit harder by the chemo and they just don't have the energy to do all that. For those folks, I think just if they can just get up and take a walk, if it's 10 minutes to start, great. If they can get out 20 or 30 minutes and walk around the neighborhood, that's critical. Movement is life, and if you can get moving, that's going to do you a world of good, no matter what it is.
Yeah, definitely. Huh.
hmm
And I would imagine you had to learn some new skills because I imagine you weren't juicing every day like you were
Right.
before
Oh my
that.
gosh. It felt like a full-time job because, I was, going to Whole Foods most every day, storing up all kinds of, fresh organic fruits and veggies, and and then preparing it. You're right. So it
Yeah.
does. It did take some time. Yeah.
Yeah. How was that transition to? How did your body
Mm.
adjust sort of those, initial few days or maybe even few weeks as you were
hmm
transitioning over to Chris's program?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great question. So first off, when you're eating all those fresh vegetables, you're going to the bathroom a lot. You've got that roughage kind of just zooming through you, and that's of course a good thing. I don't know how much of it is also reacting to the all the toxins that the chemo is putting in your body, but I think that's flushing those toxins out. That you're naturally detoxifying. Um, so that was different. I should say the chemo pretty quickly changed my taste buds. Everything in your digestive tract, from the tip of your tongue to the other end, is impacted because they're fast-growing cells, and the chemo disrupts fast-growing cells. That's the
Yeah.
intent, right? So the long and short of that is your digestive tract is just has havoc wreaked, and everything tastes bad. Everything tastes bad. It changes your taste buds terribly, right? So for me, it was like kind of this soapy, petroleum, off-putting kind of awful taste. Even a glass of water tasted awful.
Bummer. Wow.
Yeah, yeah.
Shoot. Has it come
So
back, your taste?
it does,
Okay, good.
and I'm completely back now. But yeah, but you're not doing it for the taste. You just This is food is medicine, so you just drink your juice, eat your big salad, and just to treat it as prescription.
Yeah. Was there at any point along this journey where you
Mm.
felt validation from maybe the people who were taking care of you, whether it was doctors, nurses, or anyone kind of saying like, yeah, what you're doing, how you're eating, this like lifestyle that you're trying to lead while also receiving chemotherapy, that's a great idea.
Yes, I did get that. I lost some weight, but I needed it, and I felt great. I didn't look like the typical cancer patient, except for the fact that all my hair, fell out. Um, but I wasn't weak and, emaciated and, tired and struggling. I wasn't like that at all. Now, the biggest validation, frankly, came after my second scan. So I had 6 cycles of chemotherapy, separated by 3 weeks. And after my second chemo, I did a full body scan and visited with my oncologist. She opens it up and her jaw dropped because I had what she called bulky disease. I had a very big mass, as I said, in my neck and chest. And it was completely gone after the second cycle.
Wow.
And she said, I would have loved to see this after 6 cycles. This is extraordinary after 2.
Wow. So she was expecting to hopefully see that after 6 cycles, but you did it in
Right.
2.
Right. And when she sent me to the radiation oncologist, we had a frank discussion about that because I said, so where are you going to aim the radiation? There's nothing. And he said, well, we would traditionally just aim it at where the cancer was. And I said, well, there's absolutely nothing since the second chemo. He said, you've got a very good point. And I asked him the same thing. I said, radiation is toxic, isn't it? Oh, yeah. And it does have carcinogenic effects, right? It can bring on other cancers. Oh, yes. So I said, so there is risk involved in that, right? He said, you're absolutely right. And he said, to be honest, I could probably only justify maybe a 10% increase in your longevity if we use radiation now. So I think we could skip it.
Wow. How did that
He
feel to
said
hear
that.
that?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. How did you feel after hearing that?
That was, well, completely validated,
Yeah.
right? Like, obviously, this is working. And frankly, they ought to be using this as a
Mm.
therapy, if nothing else, alongside the chemo.
Yeah.
Uh, uh, so it astounds me that they didn't take more interest in it.
Yeah, because did you receive any other education, like kind of any other lifestyle factors that would be beneficial for you to practice while you were also receiving chemo?
Well, they did encourage, the group exercise therapy. They did have a nutritionist, but the nutritionist, and I spoke to 2 actually at the hospital, and they both said, well, you really need to augment with some animal protein.
Mm.
You ought to at least add salmon in there,
Yeah.
and maybe some lamb and things like that.
I will say when I did my rotation, this was over a decade ago now, so it's been a while and things
Yeah,
have changed, but when I did my
yeah,
rotation in a cancer center, that was the recommendation. It was really eat whatever you want was kind of the main thing and eat as much fat and protein as you can to get those calories in because the more nutrient dense of foods you can eat, kind of the better off you're going to be because you're not going to be
right,
eating a whole lot.
right,
So,
right.
yeah. Wow.
And you go into the clinic waiting your turn to get the chemo, and they've got all kinds of sugary things there in the lobby for
Mm.
you. Even the granola bars with the fruit filled things. I say fruit,
Yeah.
who knows what it is, right?
Right.
And I should mention, by the way, speaking of sugar, that the number one thing you eliminate from diet, that Chris makes it very clear, is all sugar and flour and processed foods. They all go away.
they're pro-inflammatory. I mean, it
Exactly.
logically it makes sense.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And you're trying to get, an anti-inflammatory regimen in your body.
Yeah. Yeah.
And by the way, that's very healing when you have cancer, but it's a very good idea even if you don't.
Yeah. Right. Absolutely.
If you're eating whole foods all the time, you just have this sense of satiety that you don't otherwise.
Yeah. Yep.
So it sounds daunting at first, I'm sure, for a lot of people to get to do that. But once you break free of those, it really is easier than you think.
Yeah. Yeah, because you're right. I mean, your body adapts, your digestive system adapts, your taste buds adapt to where those foods
Hmm.
maybe were once off-putting or not as flavorful or appealing become
Hmm.
really delicious. But it
That's
takes
right.
time, like you said.
That's right.
Yeah. So you drastically, well, maybe not so drastically, but you change your diet. You're eating, you're overdosing on nutrients. What were some other lifestyle factors that you were doing as well while you were getting chemotherapy?
Hmm. So I also did a couple of radical things. So, well, I'll start with the easiest one, and that is I got an Aura ring. So an Aura ring is a wearable device that tracks your sleep and a lot of other key data when you're sleeping. So your heart rate variability, all kinds of cycles of sleep, of course. So REM sleep and deep sleep, etc. And I track that very closely because sleep is such an important part of the reparative process, right?
Yeah.
Uh, I mean, not everybody knows you need REM sleep for emotional repair and you need deep sleep for physical repair. I did high doses of vitamin C. I see a functional medicine doctor in the area, Jay Stevens, and Dr. Stevens has got all kinds of cutting edge therapies that are not in traditional medicine, like hyperbaric chambers. I did that.
Would you mind explaining what that is?
Absolutely. So the hyperbaric chamber was primarily used for years for divers that went to great depths and then came up too quick. And what would happen is you'd get little bubbles of either oxygen or nitrogen in your joints, in particular, kind of stuck. So what they do is get you in a hyperbaric chamber and bring you to depth again, and let you slowly off gas those little bubbles in your body. And so that's called the bends, and that's the way of repairing from the bends. Well, if you do that, if you go to a depth, let's say 1.5 to 2 times normal atmosphere, and you breathe pure oxygen, that oxygen goes to all of your cells. So on a cellular level, you are repairing by hyperoxygenating all your cells.
Wow. Wow, that's fascinating.
Yeah, and that's particularly good and documented for nerve damage. So it's known to help people even with PTSD to repair. And it's also very good repairing all kinds of other processes in your body.
Yeah.
So I did that. High vitamin C is very controversial, but if you do that by IV, that is said to help repair. Right?
Wow. I love talking about these different, just these things that we don't think about, these treatments, these alternative treatments
Right.
that we just don't hear about. So I appreciate you kind of just sharing these different things because sometimes we just don't know what's out there, what's possible.
Right. And most traditional docs don't know enough about it either.
Yeah. Yep.
So
Yeah.
you're not going to be able to go to your typical primary physician and have them suggest this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. It's true.
It's too new. It's too cutting edge. If you read Mark Hyman's books, for example, you'll hear about that. Maybe John Robbins, John and Ocean Robbins have a terrific resource for kind of cutting edge medicine and diet. You probably know that. And also, I think it's we talked about the doctor up at Tufts. Is it Greger?
Oh yeah, Dr. Greger.
Right?
I mean, there is a Dr. Greger. Is he at Tufts?
Yep.
Okay.
I think he is.
Yeah.
And he talks a lot about nutrition.
Yes.
So, for example, he says that eating chicken has been linked clinically to lymphoma.
Wow. Yikes. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes, because he wrote the book How Not to Die,
that's it.
and he has a great website, nutritionfacts.org, which
Yes,
is a lot of just evidence-based, plant-based information.
that's right.
Yeah, which is phenomenal. I love his
Yes.
website. George, is there any advice that you would give to someone who may be in your situation, early 2023, who's kind of trying to navigate just really all the information that's out there and trying to figure out kind of the best approach for them?
Yes, yes. I would say really carefully consider some of these alternatives to traditional medicine. Keep an open mind to this. I realize it's not for everyone. And I also have come to know that we kind of believe what we believe, all of us, So it typically people think, I just want a pill to take care of it. I just trust the doctors and I just want to go that way. And they just kind of believe that. And I would just encourage them to open their minds to some of the other treatments. And even if you don't go whole hog into that, at least explore it. Consider if you have cancer, you know, some of these other things that can influence the outcomes. You know.
Yep. I think that's wonderful because that's what you did. And
Yeah.
look at where you are today.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's
Yeah.
been how long now and how are things going?
So my last chemotherapy was July 19th. I had another scan a month later, and got the all clear. So basically the middle of August. So it is pretty recent, and I'm going in for another kind of check in with my oncologist next week. We'll need to do that, about every 3 or 4 months, probably for another year, and then every 6 months. And they don't consider you cured until it's been at least 3 years with no reoccurrence.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
I look forward to hearing from you 3 years from now.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Love to talk
yeah,
to you.
yeah. That's wonderful. Well, good.
Yeah.
Well, we'll include a lot of those resources in the show notes. That way, for you listening, if you're curious to learn more about Chris's protocol or some of the other resources that George mentioned, you'll be able to easily find those below. But George, I just appreciate you so much. I appreciate you sharing your
Absolutely,
story and
Ashley.
just being so open and honest about everything.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I'm so glad we got to meet and have that very first discussion that really helped, affirm what I was doing, and now this follow-up conversation is terrific.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah. And a big shout out to Carrie who introduced us. So that was really
Yes,
wonderful.
thank you, Carrie.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yep, absolutely. George, thank you again for coming on the show. I just really appreciate you, and thank you again for sharing your story.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me again.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it, Ashley.
Yep. And thank you for tuning in today. We'll catch you on the next episode.
Until next time, keep thriving.